Hello, a very good afternoon to everybody present here. Allow us a couple of more minutes before we go ahead and start the webinar. I hope everybody in the audience is able to see my screen. All right, so today's session is about old versus new tax regime. Which one should you pick? What should be the guiding factors? What are those key things you need to keep in mind, whether it is with respect to tax slabs or deductions or exemptions? And this is something we've seen a lot of people come to us with this question. कि कौन सी tax regime use करे? The old regime is better or the new regime? कैसे पता लगाएं कि old regime better है या new regime? मेरी income इतनी है, so should I opt for the new regime or the old regime? So we are here to go ahead and help you understand and address all these questions, to help you go ahead and take informed decisions that you are better equipped if you have to go ahead and decide which regime is more beneficial for you. So in today's session, first we will understand the key differences between the old tax regime and the new tax regime. After that, once we've understood, we will go ahead and take a look at the tax slabs for the different regimes for assessment year 25-26. Please remember, this webinar is exclusively for assessment year 25-26, which is for the year starting from 1st April 2024 and ending on 31st March 2025. So financial year 24-25 becomes assessment year 25-26. So this is exclusively for the filing you will be doing on or before 31st of July 2025. Then we will go ahead and do a comparison between budget 2024 and budget 2025 with respect to the new tax regime rates, the deductions and the exemptions, what is available under the old regime, what is not available under the old regime, what are the effective tools to go ahead and optimize tax planning, the factors to consider while choosing the regime, whether it is the old regime or the new regime, switching between regimes. So this is another question we get asked a lot. Last year मैंने old tax regime लिया, but अब इस साल मुझे new tax regime में जाना है. Will the new tax regime be beneficial? क्या मैं कर सकता हूँ ऐसा? Is this fine? So those are the questions we will be addressing there. Then lastly, we will have a 10-minute dedicated Q&A space. So if you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please put it in the Q&A box, or you also can go ahead and unmute yourselves and ask the question at the end of the session. So first, let us understand what is the old tax regime. The old tax regime is the erstwhile tax regime which we all have been following. So this regime is there since the introduction of the Income Tax Act 1961, which we've been following. It has various exemptions and deductions it offers, for example, HRA, LTA, ATC, ATD, etc., which can go ahead and reduce your taxable income and in effect reducing your tax liability as well. Now let us talk about the new tax regime. New tax regime introduced हुआ था budget 2020 में. Now this regime, what it does is it is different from the old tax regime in the sense that unlike the old tax regime, the new tax regime does not give out any exemptions or deductions like HRA, LTA, education loan, ATC, ATD, etc. Most of the deductions and exemptions available to an individual taxpayer under the old tax regime are not available under the new tax regime. However, what makes the new tax regime more lucrative is that it offers concessional tax rate in comparison to the old tax regime. And in addition to offering concessional tax rate, in terms of operations also, the new tax regime is more simpler. The paperwork is more simple, and since you're not submitting since you're not able to claim a lot of deductions and exemptions, then it will automatically lead to a simpler filing of your ITR. And when the ITR filing is simple, you have just entered income, whatever is the income, on the same basis you have gone ahead and paid taxes, the chances of litigation also come down, especially for individual taxpayers. In addition to that, a couple of other things which make the new tax regime more lucrative are increased standard deduction in comparison to the old tax regime, and also reduction in the surcharge rate. Now, surcharge essentially refers to a tax on tax which is levied where an individual's income is more than rupees 50 lakhs per annum. जहां पर भी individual की income more than rupees 50 lakhs है, एक surcharge देना पड़ता है depending upon the income. So under the old tax regime, there are 4 rates of surcharge: 10, 15, 25, and 37%. Whereas under the new tax regime, the rates of surcharge are limited to only 10, 15, and 25%. The higher rate of surcharge of 37% is not available under the new tax regime. And more importantly, from financial year 23-24 onwards, the new tax regime has become the default tax regime. If you're a salaried employee, you can switch between the regimes freely year after year. However, in certain cases, you may have to file Form 10 IEA if you want to opt for the old tax regime. You may ask why? Because the new tax regime is the default tax regime. That is to say, by default, all taxpayers will be charged to tax under the new tax regime unless and until you have made a declaration to the contrary, wherein you go ahead and say, I want to opt for the old tax regime. And if you want to opt for the old tax regime, under certain circumstances that we will learn during the course of this webinar, you will have to file Form 10IE. Now let us take a look at the tax slab under the different regimes for assessment year 25-26. For the old tax regime, the tax slabs are as follows. For income between 2 to 2.5 lakh, there will be no taxes. For income between 2.5 to 5 lakhs, the rate of tax will be 5%. For income between 5 to 10 lakh, the rate of tax will be 20%. And for income above 10 lakh rupees, the rate of tax will be 30%. In addition to this, the old tax regime, under the old tax regime, the basic exemption limit increases depending upon the age of the person. If you're a senior citizen, that is a person who is above the age of 60 years, the basic exemption limit is rupees 3 lakhs. And if you're a super senior citizen, that is a person above the age of 80 years, your basic exemption limit will be rupees 5 lakh. The rates of surcharge under the old tax regime are as follows. As previously mentioned, it is 10, 15, 25, and 37%, followed by cess at the rate of 4%. Under the new tax regime for assessment year 25-26, the tax slabs are as follows. For income between 0 to 3 lakh, there will not be any taxes, and this is known as the basic exemption limit. For income between 3 to 7 lakhs, the rate of tax will be 5%. For income between 7 to 10 lakhs, the rate of tax will be 10%. For income between 10 to 12 lakh, the rate of tax will be 15%. Between 12 to 15 lakhs, it will be 20%. And income above rupees 15 lakhs will be chargeable at the rate of 30%. The rates of surcharge under the new tax regime are 10, 15, and 25%. As mentioned, the higher rate of 37% has been eliminated under the new regime, followed by cess at the rate of 4%. And under the new tax regime, the basic exemption limit is the same for all individuals, irrespective of your age. Whether you're under 60, above 60, or above 80, the amount of basic exemption limit remains unchanged at rupees 3 lakhs. Now let us take a look at the calculation. Under the new tax regime, utilizing rebate and standard deduction, income up to 7.5 lakhs for salaried individuals will be tax-free. Let us understand how. We have taken income from salary as rupees 7.5 lakhs, followed by standard deduction rupees 50,000. So your gross total income becomes rupees 7 lakhs. And the total taxable income, since there are no deduction, remains unchanged at rupees 7 lakh. Let us take a look at the taxes. Income up to 3 lakhs, the rate of tax is nil. So the tax is nil. Income between 3 to 6 lakhs will be chargeable at the rate of 5%, which is rupees 15,000. And income between 6 to 9 lakhs will be chargeable at the rate of 10%. Since your income exceeding rupees 6 lakh in this example is only 1 lakh, we will compute 10% on 1 lakh. The total tax payable is rupees 25,000. However, applying rebate under sections 87A, the entire amount of 25,000 will be deducted, and hence the total tax liability will be 0. Now let us compare between the budget 2024 and 2025 with respect to tax slabs. So for the current year, the tax slabs we've already discussed. For the upcoming year, which is year starting 1st April 2025, the tax slabs are as follows. Income up to 4 lakh will not be chargeable to tax. Income between 4 to 8 lakh will be chargeable at the rate of 5%. Income between 8 to 12 lakh at the rate of 10%. Income between 12 to 16 lakh at the rate of 15%. 16 to 20 lakh at the rate of 20%. 20 to 24 lakh at the rate of 25%. And lastly, income above 24 lakhs will be chargeable at the rate of 30%, followed by surcharge and cess at the rate of 4%. Now, in the previous example, you saw that rebate was applicable under 87A to the extent of 25,000 rupees, and consequently 7.5 lakhs worth of income under the new tax regime was not chargeable to tax. Similarly, starting from 1st April 2025, अगर आपकी इनकम 12,75,000 तक है, आपकी सैलरीड इनकम 12,75,000 तक है, in that case your tax liability will be nil, utilizing the rebate and standard deduction. Now let us go ahead and take a look at the deductions and exemptions, old tax regime vis-a-vis the new tax regime. What is available under the old regime and the new regime. So rebate under section 87A is available both under the old tax regime and the new tax regime. Under the old regime, it is 12,500 and under the new regime, it is 25,000 rupees. Interest on home loan for a self-occupied property is available only under the old tax regime and not the new tax regime. All the deductions under section 80C, whether you're investing in employee provident fund, life insurance premium, FD, ELSS, which is equity linked savings scheme, all of these are available only under the old tax regime, not the new tax regime. Deduction under section 80D, which is for health insurance premium or medical expenditure, again is available only under the old tax regime. Deductions under section 80 TTA or TTB, which is अगर आपको कोई भी interest मिल रहा है from savings bank account if you're a person under the age of 60 years and savings bank FD या RD interest अगर आपकी age is more than 60 years. If that is the case, income up to savings bank interest up to 10,000 rupees for people who are below the age of 60 years and up to 50,000 rupees for people who are above the age of 60 years is available under the old tax regime. Under the new tax regime, no deduction is available. Any other chapter 6A deductions, whether it is donation, interest on education loan, etc., is available only under the old tax regime and not the new tax regime. Lastly, employer's contribution to pension. अगर आपके employer आपके pension के towards कोई contribution दे रहे हैं, in such case, the pension contribution by your employer is deductible both under the old tax regime and the new tax regime. Under the old tax regime, it is deductible up to 10% of your basic salary. Under the new tax regime, it is deductible up to 14% of your basic salary. Now let us move on and talk about deductions from your salary component. HRA and LTA. HRA is house rent allowance, LTA is leave travel allowance. ये दोनों old tax regime में ही available है. Under the new tax regime, they are not available. Professional tax is available once again only under the old tax regime. Professional tax जो है, this is a tax which is paid by employees month on month. ये प्रोफेशनल टैक्स आपके एम्प्लॉयर्स ही डिडक्ट करके गवर्नमेंट को डिपॉजिट करते हैं ऑन योर बिहाफ. You end up paying up to 2,400 per annum or rupees 2,500 per annum, except in certain states where professional tax is not available. So professional tax is also available only under the old tax regime. Under the new tax regime, it is not available. Standard deduction is available both under the old tax regime and the new tax regime. And as mentioned before, under the new tax regime, the quantum of standard deduction is higher than the old tax regime. Old tax regime में आपको standard deduction up to 50,000 rupees मिलेगा. Under the new tax regime, आपकी standard deduction हो जाती है 75,000 rupees. Employees' contribution to pension is available only under the old tax regime. Under the new tax regime, it is not available. Please remember, employer का contribution अलग होता है, employee का contribution अलग होता है. Employee contribution जो है वो आपकी इंडिविजुअल कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन है जो आप कर रहे हैं. आपकी इंडिविजुअल कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन इज अवेलेबल ओनली अंडर द ओल्ड टैक्स regime, नॉट द न्यू टैक्स regime. However, जो आपके एम्प्लॉयर आपके बिहाफ पे कर रहे हैं, that is available both under the old and the new regime. Lastly, any other allowances that you get, whether it is food coupons, professional development allowance, books and periodicals, etc., is allowed only under the old tax regime and not the new tax regime. Now let us go ahead and take a look at optimizing tax planning. जब भी आप अपने taxes का plan कर रहे हैं, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. For example, first and foremost, आपको understand करना है कि आपके लिए suitable regime कौन सी होगी. Is it the old regime or the new regime? Depending upon that, you can go ahead and make other decisions. And कभी भी आपको कोई investment करना है, please do not wait till the last minute. जो इन्वेस्टमेंट आपने ईयर के बिगिनिंग में डिसाइड करा है या ईयर के बिगिनिंग में अपने एम्प्लॉयर को डिक्लेयर करा है, प्लीज गो अहेड एंड कंप्लीट दोस इन्वेस्टमेंट. 31 मार्च तक का वेट मत कीजिए वो इन्वेस्टमेंट्स करने का. द अर्लियर यू डू द बेटर. सिंपल रीजन, कंपाउंडिंग का इफेक्ट आपको मिलेगा. ओवर एंड अबाउ दैट आपका इंटरेस्ट लॉस नहीं होगा. तो प्लीज डू नॉट डिले. जो भी इन्वेस्टमेंट करना है, जो भी एक्सपेंस क्लेम करना है या जो भी एक्सपेंस इनकर करना है जिससे आपको इनकम टैक्स एक्ट में बेनिफिट हो, उनको डिले ना करें. गो अहेड एंड मेक दोस इन्वेस्टमेंट्स और गो अहेड एंड incur those expenses today. Next, regularly assessing your tax liabilities, especially where you have income from additional sources. अगर आपकी इनकम सैलरी तक डिफाइन नहीं है, बियॉन्ड सैलरी आपकी इनकम है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल इनकम फ्रॉम रेंटल प्रॉपर्टीज या इनकम फ्रॉम अदर सोर्सेज विच इज सिग्निफिकेंट. अगर आपको एफडी इंटरेस्ट सिग्निफिकेंट अमाउंट मिल रहा है या फिर यू हैव एनी अदर सोर्स ऑफ इनकम, इन दैट केस you have to go ahead and assess your total income and your tax liability regularly ताकि आप advance tax का payment timely कर पाए. Paying advance tax on time is very very important. अगर आप advance tax के लिए eligible है और आप advance taxes pay नहीं कर रहे हैं तो आपको interest provisions comply करने पड़ेंगे. Interest can be significant amount, इसलिए please avoid that. Pay advance taxes on time. आपके जो भी टैक्स डिडक्शन डॉक्यूमेंट्स है, जो भी टैक्स रिलेटेड प्रूफ्स है, प्लीज कीप देम हैंडी, स्पेशली फॉर दोज एम्प्लॉइज जिन्होंने डिक्लेयर किया है अपने एम्प्लॉयर को न्यू टैक्स रिजीम बट जिनको ओल्ड टैक्स रिजीम में मूव करना है. सो एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर, एट द टाइम ऑफ फाइलिंग, जब आप किसी एक्सपर्ट के पास है, द एक्सपर्ट विल गो अहेड एंड आस्क यू अ डिटेल ऑफ ऑल दीज डॉक्यूमेंट्स एंड इन्फॉर्मेशन. तो प्लीज कीप द डॉक्यूमेंट्स हैंडी. Next, utilizing tax loss harvesting. Tax loss harvesting is a very unique example, is a very effective tool जिससे आपके taxes कम हो सकते हैं. Essentially, tax loss harvesting में क्या होता है? If you have realized a lot of gains from the stock market, अगर आपके शेयर या म्यूचुअल फंड बेचने से काफी ज्यादा गेन्स हुए हैं, you can go ahead and reduce the taxable gains or reduce the income taxes on such gain by going ahead and selling your underperforming stocks. अगर आपके पास कोई underperforming या consistently loss making stocks है, आप उनको जाके sell कर सकते हो and the losses from those stocks can be adjusted against your capital gains. So this is known as tax loss harvesting. आप tax loss harvesting बहुत effectively utilize करके अपनी overall taxable income और tax liability दोनों को कम कर सकते हैं. Next, reinvesting capital gains for exemption. अगर आपका capital gain बहुत ज्यादा है and you are not able to do tax loss harvesting, if you are that lucky investor जिसके कोई losses ही ना हो, तो in that case जो भी capital gain है आप उसको residential property में reinvest कर सकते हैं. If you are not keen on reinvesting in residential house property, आप उसका deposit rural electrification bonds या NHIA bonds में भी कर सकते हैं up to ₹50 lakhs. There are associated conditions also. For more details on this, you can go ahead and connect with an expert advisor or also connect with somebody at ClearTax. We will help you out, but go ahead and make that investment. अगर आप timely investment नहीं कर पा रहे हैं तो आप इसको एक अलग बैंक अकाउंट CGAS अकाउंट में भी डाल के रख सकते हैं. इसके लिए आपको एक अलग बैंक अकाउंट ओपन करना पड़ेगा. Next, file ITR well in advance before the due date. Very very important. Delay ना करें अपनी ITR filing, whether you have a tax refund or a payment. अगर आपका tax refund है तो बिल्कुल ही लेट ना करें. go ahead and immediately file your ITR ताकि आपका जो भी refund है जल्दी ITR process हो जाए और आपको refund जल्दी आ जाए. Similarly, if you have a tax payable, उसमें भी ज़्यादा late ना करें because the more you delay payment of taxes, the higher the chances कि आपका interest काफी बढ़ेगा and there are chances last minute rush में आप शायद file ना कर पाओ या भूल जाओ file करना. तो in those cases आपके penal consequences भी होंगे in the form of interest. So please avoid करें ये सब, timely ITR file करें. Now let us go ahead and understand the factors to consider while choosing the regime. अब आपको old regime में जाना है या new regime में जाना है, how do you go ahead and understand this? आप इसका कैसे decision ले? There are certain guiding factors. These are those. First and foremost, आपको अपनी new income level का ध्यान रखना है. अगर for the financial year 24-25 आपकी income 7 या 7.5 लाख से कम है, अगर आप salaried individual है, तो the new regime may be more beneficial for you because तब आप standard deduction और rebate दोनों का advantage उठा सकते हैं. However, अगर आपकी income bracket higher है और आपको tax भी ज़्यादा pay करना पड़ रहा है, तो old regime may be more beneficial for you क्योंकि old regime में deductions और exemptions का quantum ज़्यादा है. However, if you are looking for simplicity and compliance, the new tax regime may be more beneficial for you because new tax regime में filing करना बहुत ही simple है, paperwork भी बहुत कम है. ये suitable है उन individuals के लिए जिनकी significant income नहीं है, जिनकी significant expenses या investments भी नहीं है, जिससे tax advantage मिल सके. Next, old tax regime is more beneficial if आपका investment काफी ज़्यादा है. Although old tax regime में compliance effort बच जाते हैं and इसमें आपको अपने investment को track करके रखना पड़ता है regularly. But if you are able to go ahead and utilize these expenses or investments which help in tax saving, the old regime may be more beneficial for you. अगर आप long term saving capability पे जाएं, then the new tax regime provides tax saving upfront. New tax regime में without investment आपको tax advantage मिल रहा है in the form of higher standard deduction या फिर lesser rates, lesser surcharge. इसलिए new tax regime does not encourage long term savings. However, अगर आपको old tax regime में रहना है, अगर आपको long term savings पे ध्यान देना है, तो the old tax regime may be beneficial because old tax regime encourage करती है tax payers को कि वो जाके इन्वेस्ट करे. पब्लिक प्रोविडेंट फंड हो गया या एम्प्लॉय प्रोविडेंट फंड, नेशनल पेंशन स्कीम इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्सेट्रा. इससे क्या होता है, ओल्ड टैक्स regime इनको बूस्ट करती है, इनमें इन्वेस्टमेंट करने से डिडक्शन देती है. सो इन इफेक्ट ये आपको एनकरेज करता है और मोटिवेट करता है कि आप इन्वेस्ट करें, स्पेशली अगर आप रिटायरमेंट कॉर्पस के लिए अक्यूमुलेट कर रहे हैं आपकी वेल्थ को. सो इन दैट केस, कीपिंग अ लॉन्ग टर्म पर्सपेक्टिव इन माइंड, द ओल्ड regime may be well suited for you. But please note that whatever are the discussion that we are doing here, it should not be construed as a financial or a professional advice. ये एक general understanding है and this is only for educational purposes. अगर आपको कोई in-depth advice चाहिए, कोई और personalized advice चाहिए, then I would highly recommend connecting with a tax expert or a financial advisor for the same. Now let us talk about switching between the regimes. अब this is a very common question which is asked कि मैं old tax regime में जाऊं या new tax regime में जाऊं, इतने सारे doubts है, क्या करना है क्या नहीं है. So this is why we have come up with a breakage so that you go ahead and understand it easily. First and foremost, अगर आप salaried individual है without any business or professional income, आपकी ना कोई professional income अभी है ना past में थी in a particular financial year, और आप eligible हो ITR 1 या 2 फाइल करने के लिए. If this is the case, if you satisfy these conditions, then you can go ahead and freely switch between the regimes year after year. अगर आपने employer को एक regime declare की है, but you realize along the way that the other regime is more beneficial, you may not be able to change it at your employers. However, you will be able to go ahead and change it at the time of filing your returns. जब आप return file कर रहे हैं, अगर आप ITR 1 या 2 के फाइलर हो, तो you can go ahead and indefinitely freely switch between the regimes year after year. At least that is what the law that stands as of today. However, अगर आप ऐसे individual हो जिसकी बिजनेस या प्रोफेशनल इनकम भी रही हो या है अलॉन्ग विथ योर सैलरीड इनकम, आप ITR 3 या 4 फाइल कर रहे हो, इन सच अ केस आप कोई भी regime, whether it is the new regime या old regime, you can opt for the regime only once. उसके बाद you can switch back to the regime once. After that you will not be allowed. आप जो भी regime select करेंगे वो default regime हो जाएगी. For example, currently the new tax regime is the default tax regime. तो आप new tax regime में filing कर रहे हैं. However, you want to switch to the old regime. तो आपको एक फॉर्म फाइल करना होगा, फॉर्म 10IEA. Form 10IEA is applicable only to those individuals who are filing ITR 3 or 4. यदि आप ITR 3 या 4 फाइल कर रहे हैं तो आपको फॉर्म 10IEA भी फाइल करना होगा बिफोर फाइलिंग योर रिटर्न ऑफ इनकम. एंड आपको रिजीम स्विच का मौका एक ही बार मिलेगा, बार बार नहीं मिलेगा. I hope this is clear. With this, we have come to an end of today's presentation. If you have any questions relating to any topic that we've discussed, or you want a more detailed discussion, you can go ahead, unmute yourselves and ask the question, or put the question in the Q&A box. Or even if you have any other question beside this session on income taxes for individuals, please go ahead and ask the same. We have a question in the Priya, if you want, you can go ahead and post the questions here as well. Not an issue. I will take up the questions and answer here. Sure. Sure, Priya. You can go ahead and share the list with Himang and we will revert on email. I think in that case, we will, go ahead and end this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure delivering this webinar to you. And we look forward to all your questions. And in due course of time, we will definitely get back to you. Thank you so much.